and I'm very proud of it. And I went to the Games concert, and I had heard June had been sick, and I saw her come in, and I was so thrilled. There's June. Told Jim, I said, I got to go speak to June. So what do? I walk over, and she said, we're going to have a meeting pretty soon, and we'd like to feature the Carter DuBose family. Would you speak? Well, how can you refuse June? You know, nobody can. Even Gaines said he wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for her. But, so as I thought about it, about 2 minutes, I called my cousin Johnny, who is John, my grandmother and granddaddy's youngest boy, and talked to him. And then Johnny, of course, was, because they've been into, I know the things, but they're better than I am. So I'd like to introduce to you my cousin Johnny DuBose.
You want me over here?
Wherever it's good.
You want to know
Can you get me here?
Wherever it's good for you.
This is my brother Stephen. He's sort of making a tape of this. So.
Give you something to lay things
So
on. You.
Thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'm glad for the chance to be able to speak just a few minutes about my family and tell you a little bit of what I know and what I found out and what I'm still working on. As I was preparing these remarks, questions just kept coming up, and it makes you want to research further and dig deeper and see what else you can find out, so I'm in the process of trying to do that. As Carlene mentioned, we're here to talk about the DuBose Carter families, and those families became united because of the marriage in 1918 of Ernest Young DuBose, my grandfather, and Ruby Margaret Carter DuBose, my grandmother. So what I'd like to do, I think it would make the most sense, is to talk generally about them and their lives together here in Frostproof, and then step back and look at the separate families of each of them and what relationship they might have had to Frostproof. As Carly mentioned, she was the firstborn of the grandchildren. I'm third to the youngest. This is my brother. He is the youngest of the 16 grandchildren. So we have Carlene and Stephen and myself here today, and one more, Belinda DuBose Hurst is also here. She's one of the grandchildren. We have my father, John DuBose, who was one of the children, the youngest son, and his brother, James DuBose, is also here. So there's quite a good representation of our family here today. Let me begin by talking about my grandfather, Ernest Young DuBose. He was born on February 13th, 1892 in Pineville, Florida, which is just about as close to the Alabama line as you can be and still be in Florida. So this is up somewhere north of Pensacola. He and his brothers and sisters were born either in Florida or right across the line in Alabama. He happened to be born there in Escambia County, Florida. My grandmother, Ruby Margaret Carter DuBose, was born on January the 2nd, 1902 in Tiger Bay, Florida, here in Polk County. And I'll have a few things to say about Tiger Bay in just a little while. In approximately 1912, my grandfather's parents had heard from some friends about a place called Frostproof. And they understood that the climate was very nice and that there was steady work here in the citrus and lumber industries. And my grandfather's father had been working up in the Alabama and northwest Florida area in the lumber business, but it was somewhat sporadic up there. So he took the chance and moved down here to Frostproof with his wife and 8 of the 11 children that they had at that time. So in 1912 you have the first DuBoses coming to Frostproof to find work. And so that was quite a good start, since you had a mother and a father and 8 children. So there was 10 of them who came down in 1912. In 1913, my grandfather followed. He was already a grown man by that time. He was working as a telegraph operator for the L&N Railroad up in the Pensacola area. And he applied for and received a job offer here in Frostproof for the Atlantic Coast Railroad. And so he came down here and began working at the depot as a telegraph operator. And then before he left to go into the service for World War I, he actually became the assistant to the station master here at the depot in Frostproof. While working at the depot, he took his meals across the street at the old Gant Hotel. I think it was later known as the Lake Reedy Hotel. Every day the dinner bell would ring at noon, and all the businessmen and tourists in town would find their way to the hotel to have their dinner, as it was called then. On one particular day, he noticed that the bell ringer was a nice-looking young lady, and he ended up with her as his waitress that day. And very soon a romance developed between him and my grandmother, Ruby, and they were married on March the 4th, 1918. They were married at the courthouse in Bartow, and Judge Kelsey Blanton performed the ceremony. Incidentally, at that time in 1918, he was 26 years old and she was 16 years old. And they got married. My grandmother says, and we have an interview that was taped, and it's been transcribed and it's been saved now on DVD or CD and on the computer, so hopefully we probably need to get a copy here for the museum to have, because it was an interview conducted with my grandmother, her youngest sister, Willie Wells, and one of her sisters-in-law, Demi Carter. And in that taped interview, they tell a lot of the history of Frostproof and of their families, and so it's very interesting. And as pioneers themselves, you know, they speak the language, and it's just a glimpse into what a true pioneer really is. And so a lot of what I'm saying here today is taken from that interview. But my grandmother comments on the meeting between herself and my grandfather. She said that when he first came to town, she spotted him one day when she was climbing a persimmon tree. And she was at the very top of the tree and spotted him, and thought he was nice looking. Eventually they met up at the post office, according to her, and he told her jokingly that he was going to write her a letter and mail it. And she said that if he did that, she'd have all four corners burned and mail it back. He then asked her for a date, and they started dating, and we know the rest of the story from that. Shortly after their marriage, the United States entered World War I, and my grandfather went into the service, into the Army, to serve during World War I. You would think that as a experienced telegraph operator, they would have had some job for him in that field. And of course, when you're in the Army, you have to do what they tell you to do, and you would think that's what they would want him to do. But instead, they trained him to be a chef, and he worked as a chef during his time in the Army. And he fell in love with that profession, actually, and came back to Frostproof eventually, and opened up, over the next couple of decades, several different diners and restaurants in Frostproof. His first one, as I understand it, was a restaurant that was opened at the southeast corner of Scenic Highway and Wall Street. At that time, it was described as the sidewalks along Wall Street were made of wooden planks, and the streets were made out of sand and straw mixed together. In 1925, a Dr. Allred bought the property and built the yellow brick building that we now know as Citizens Bank and the Arcade. And so he lost his lease on the property. He established a second restaurant just a little further east on Wall Street and operated out of there for a while. And then in the 1930s, he built a diner on Scenic Highway at 5th Street and worked out of there for a while.